This episode of the What the FinTech podcast is sponsored by WorkFusion. Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of What the FinTech, the podcast from the team behind FinTech Futures and the Banking Technology magazine. My name is Paul Hindle, editor of FinTech Futures, and for this episode we're joined by David Caruso, Vice President of Financial Crime Compliance at WorkFusion. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Excellent. It's great to have you here. And just to get started, would you like to quickly let us know a bit more about yourself and WorkFusion then?
Yeah, sure. My title is I'm the Vice President of Financial Crime Compliance at WorkFusion. WorkFusion is a software company that specializes in developing and bringing to market AI agents to help financial institutions comply and combat financial crime. And my background is in financial crime compliance, about 30 years. Not a technologist. I'm someone who's built and run programs in financial crime, although I did co-found a software startup a few years ago, so I know enough about technology, and I have a great interest in AI. So blend that operational experience with how modern software can tackle some of these decade-old problems.
Sounds great. And again, great to have you here, and thanks so much for taking the time out to speak with us today. So on the show this week, we'll be exploring the topic of financial crime compliance and how advances in AI, as you've just mentioned there, are causing a generational shift in the anti-money laundering technology space. We'll dive into how AI is revolutionising AML tech and the key elements of financial crime compliance that are most impacted by AI right now, the challenges that exist for AI adoption in the financial crime compliance sector, the key benefits being offered by the technology and its next stages for development, and of course, how WorkFusion has looked to utilise AI agents to help its clients detect and prevent financial crimes. So to start off then, David, can you give us a brief overview of financial crime compliance and explain why AI is well suited to bring change to this field?
Sure. So every financial institution pretty much in the world that operates in developed countries has a long list of rules and regulations they have to comply with. And the purpose of those is to identify and report either potentially suspicious activity involving financial crime, fraud, money laundering, and also terror financing. So obviously money being sent to organizations that don't want to carry out terror. So technically financial crime started in the early 70s, but it really took off. And rules and regulations got much more extensive and onerous after September 11th, 2001. And since that period of time, 25 years now, financial institutions have to implement software, have to hire teams of people to investigate potentially suspicious activity, report that suspicious activity to various government entities. In the US, it's an arm of the Department of Treasury. In the UK, it's a law enforcement agency. And the purpose is to help law enforcement direct their resources to things that banks and financial institutions think are potentially suspicious. That's financial crime. Just a brief sort of summary of what that is.
Excellent. And I guess, how has the financial service industry as a whole viewed AI then for financial crime compliance in the past, and has that perspective changed in the past year?
It has changed. And I would say the concept of AI, maybe different terminology, but machine learning, and some of AI's, what we now know, what we understand are AI's component parts, really started being discussed around 2015. And yes, it was met with a lot of skepticism. And I think rightfully so. We've all seen that technology hype cycle graph. That might have been the beginning of some of the hype around it. I think there was more talk about it than the ability to deliver. And I do think that had a little bit of a hangover. So from 2015, for the next few years, again, a lot of skepticism. Some of the larger banks might have tried something out, but not too much. COVID hit, financial crime compliance overtrenched like much of the business world did, focused on just what the fundamentals were. But in the last couple of years, 2 years, there's been a noticeable shift. And we know that because we're in the business of developing AI agents and we have a lot of clients, we have a lot of customers. And we have no trouble having conversations with banks of all sizes all over the world that are just showing a real interest in it. So the technology has improved, and with that, so has the perception of it among financial institutions. Many of them are already subscribing and buying AI, and those who aren't are looking to do so. So yeah, I think we're in an age now where it's accepted that it's real, but they have to figure out what's real and what works for their institution.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, I guess what aspects of financial crime compliance and do you think are being most kind of affected by AI right now?
Well, financial crime compliance, a lot of the work in financial crime compliance, unfortunately, it's mundane, it's repetitive. Because there's so many rules and regulations, there's a lot of documentation requirements. Right? So the regulators just don't say to a bank, hey, put in a program, let us know how it's going. Maybe we'll check in once in a while. No, the regulators aggressively, they go to financial institutions each year and and aggressively is the right word, but they examine the institutions to see if their programs are in fact compliant. So there's always a lot of push and pressure from the regulators. And again, I think from my perspective, well, fortunately or unfortunately, the regulators want to see proof of work. So there's a lot of documentation. So where does AI work? AI is really changing that type of work. The gathering of information, the organization of that information, the presentation, the documentation, the creation of artifacts. And that is, in some cases, that's more than half of the work that an employee may do in the course of a day or a week. Half their time is spent. So AI is able to automate that, but it's not just automating the gathering of it. Again, it's able to process it to some degree. We can talk more about that if you're interested in that. Organize it, present it. And so it frees up people from some of those mundane, repetitive rote tasks that quite frankly are debilitating. They're not fun, but people don't like to do that stuff. It's led to high turnover. And so that's one area. Now that's first generation. We're now moving into second generation AI agents, which are doing more of what I would call sort of investigative reasoning, determination of, okay, we have all these transactions. Are there indications that these transactions are out of the norm for this customer? If they are out of the norm, is that indicative of just a change in their business or lifestyle? Or is that indicative of perhaps financial crime, something nefarious that we need to look at? So we can talk more about that if you'd like. That's how AI is unfolding now along financial crime compliance operations.
That sounds good. So, I mean, yeah, I'm happy to dive into that a little bit more if you'd like. I mean, what are the key improvements then? I mean, you've touched on a couple of things there, but the key improvements you think that AI users are experiencing today?
Yeah, so it is real quick, sort of a day in the life of a financial crime analyst. For one role is they have to research customers, and KYC and is a term I think most people are familiar with now. So part of that has to do with searching the world's database of news information. Has this customer or potential customer ever been involved in something that's being reported by a news organization around the world we would consider a risk? Were they ever the subject of a criminal investigation, or were they ever just alleged to have been involved in some public corruption scheme? I mean, how many pieces of news are there in the world over the last 20 years? Billions and billions and billions. And a typical way of doing that would literally be a Google search with maybe a search string. They'd say David Caruso and then fraud or money laundering, corruption, and up would come 90,000 results. Now, there's also software companies that search the news that you're not getting the 90,000 results, but you still may be getting 100 results. And they're imperfect because a name is not necessarily the best indicator. My name's David Caruso. There's, I don't know, tens of thousands of people with that name in the world, maybe, or even. So what would have to happen is a human being would have to read through those. The reality is they wouldn't read through them. No one's going to read 100 articles. So they would scan them. And of course, that's prone to omission, to missing things. Well, AI is able to read all of those articles, process that unstructured data, is able to determine with a much higher degree of likelihood that this David Caruso is in fact the David Caruso who is a customer at your bank. And yes, they were alleged to have been involved in this. And they're able to do that through all of the words are tokenized. They're put into trigrams. I'm a little technical here, but it's able to help. So now you take a process that just in that one instance could have taken an analyst 30 minutes to do. It now takes the analyst 3 or 4 minutes because now they only have 2 or 3 things of value to look at. Now, it still may not be B, but they're not looking at 100 things. They're looking at 2, 3, or 4 things. It's not simple. That's complex technology, but that's an easy to understand example of taking something that's whatever, reducing that work by 80%. So that's pretty significant.
That sounds good. And I mean, I guess on the topic of complex technology, I mean, agentic AI has been a big topic of discussion over this year. How have you at WorkFusion then specifically looked to implement AI agents to help firms fight financial crime? Can you tell us about some of the live implementations you have right now?
Sure. So in our staff, we have 6 AI agents that we deploy. We used to refer to them as digital workers, but we now refer to them as AI agents, although digital workers is still a great way to think about them. So what's interesting about what we do is typically when new software companies emerge in the financial crime space, they're always looking to replace an outdated system, like one of these screening systems or a system that would monitor transactions and flag potentially suspicious activity. But we've personified our agent. We give them names, like the agent, that adverse media example I just gave you. We have an agent named Evan who does that. Because what we want our customers to understand is Evan or Isaac or Edward, these are all the names of our agents. It's as if think about them as if they were a new employee. Now, but they're coming to work on the first day with 5 years of experience, and they're really expert in what they do. And they're able to do it. This is where they're not human beings. They can process 1,000 media articles in seconds where no human can do that. But we're doing the work that existing systems, software systems generate. So that's sort of a critical function of AI agents. In addition, the agents I've mentioned, they work together, just like staff in an office would work together. Right? So Evan performs a function, Edward performs other functions, but Edward's fine. Edward does what we call enhanced due diligence, or he does research on riskier customers. Well, part of that is you have to do this negative news or adverse media search. So Edward talks to Evan. So that's a way in which the AI is agentic, right? I think one of the markers of, is it really agentic, is what you have multiple agents working in unison, and they only call each other. Just like an office staff, you would only ask a coworker a question when you needed a question answered. So that's another thing, like Edward will only talk to Evan when necessary. When Edward realizes, okay, what I'm doing here requires Evan's help, let me chat with Evan and get some information.
Excellent. Sounds great. I mean, given how fast AI tech is evolving at the moment, how do you keep on top of new developments to ensure that your tech remains at the cutting edge of what AI can do?
Well, from my perspective, one thing is we obviously watch the marketplace. We have great engineers and developers who it certainly seems like they each have a passion for what they're doing. So when you're passionate about something, you're going to read about it. My role here is to more communicate it. So personally, it's just something I enjoy. I'm going to read about it. I listen to podcasts such as this. I want to find out what's out there. Now, I also bring a skeptic's view to it as well. So having been an operator in this field, I understand that sometimes there's a lot of marketing hype. I can read articles or I can listen to podcasts where it's all doom and gloom. Right? AI is moving so fast, it's going to replace us. Then 30 minutes later, I can read something that says AI's reached its limits. It's never going to get any better. This is not real reality. But what's great about the role I'm in is because I can take all of that commentary and apply it to, okay, what are our clients doing today? And can the technology augment what they're doing today? I enjoy being able to listen to the pundits, the positive and the negative, and say, okay, I can understand the arguments on each side, but when I apply that to financial crime compliance, in this case, I'm going to agree with the optimist because we're actually doing something there. Or maybe I agree with the pessimist because, we're not going to fully replace human beings from making critical decisions, for example. That's how I try to keep up with things.
Excellent. I'll try not to veer too much towards the doom and gloom side of things, but looking at, I guess, the challenges then. What challenges exist for AI adoption in the financial crime compliance sector, and what potential risks does AI pose there?
Well, I think one of the challenges is, as I mentioned, it's a highly regulated environment. So regulators from the UK, the EU, the US, they are advocating that financial institutions explore and look at AI to help them across all functions. However, it also presents a risk to regulators. And so regulators know that financial institutions need to adopt it, but if financial institutions adopt it and they don't deploy it properly, they don't manage it properly, that can create problems at the financial institution. For example, suspicious activity goes unidentified, unreported. Well, that then creates a problem, a political problem for the regulators, because they don't want to be regulating a bank that's failed in its AI implementation. And as a result of it, criminals have found this sort of open gate where they can just use a bank to launder money. Because then you might imagine that the politicians in every country will then pummel the regulators for failing to do their job. So you've got a little bit of push and pull here. So as a result of that, banks will move a little bit more slowly in adopting than, say, an industry that's not regulated, where, the Silicon Valley move fast and fail ethos isn't really something financial institutions subscribe to. They can't. Moving fast and failing in this area, not going to happen. So one of the impediments, it's not going to prevent AI. It's just, like I said, it's going to make the decisions a little more deliberate, which needs a little more time. In the moment, it seems like it's taking a long time. But when you look back at the end of a year, you say, yeah, there was a lot of progress in the last 12 months. I think that's probably one of the bigger impediments or challenges in the financial services sector with AI.
And I guess looking ahead then as well, what are the upcoming stages of AI development then in financial crime compliance, and how might that change the industry going forward?
So we've had this whole conversation, and what I haven't mentioned is the underlying reality that often doesn't get spoken about, even among those of us in the field, is currently and historically, financial institutions detect very, very little financial crime. There's a lot of debate about how much money is the proceeds of crime and laundering. Let's just say it's $1 trillion a year, which might be on the low side. Well, financial institutions don't detect much of that. And part of it is because the detection systems are, you could argue, more analog technology. So there hasn't been a lot of development in better ways to identify and detect, because there's work to improve before that, like we've spoken about, the repetitive things. So I'm seeing this as, okay, maybe analogies are never great, but I'll use one here. We're clearing out the brush in order to be able to look at, okay, what are the issues that we really need to focus on? And in order to identify technology better, I think we're going to need more development in an aspect of AI that's known as deep learning. I won't go too deep into that, but if somebody wants to read about deep learning, I think deep learning is what's going to change how we identify potentially suspicious activity, which ironically may end up increasing work. So we're sort of reducing some amount of work, the mundane, but we may be increasing the work that requires more critical thinking, more analysis. And I think machines will get better at that too. But I also think that there'll always be a need for an experienced, skilled human professional to be involved in those more complex investigations.
Excellent. Yeah. So I guess, what advice would you give to financial services firms in terms of how they should be approaching their AI strategies when it comes to tackling financial crime?
Well, I define they need, because they're highly regulated, they need a formal process and program in place. How are we exploring AI when we meet with vendors? What are the things we're seeking? And again, this is also just sound business decision making. But it also, the regulators will say, well, why did you select WorkFusion? Or why did you select another company? What was your process? And they have to, from the board level, from the CEO, they have to, one of the terms in banking is they have to identify what their risk appetite is. Do we want to go all in on AI? Like just go right to this deep learning? Wouldn't make sense. In my opinion, let's start small with automating some of this manual work. And then how do we progress from there? So I think that's just a general sound approach for banks or financial institutions to take.
Excellent. And I guess just to finish off today, then, I mean, what's next for WorkFusion then in the near-term future? Is there anything you have in the pipeline that you can tell us about now?
We're now fully deploying I don't know if we're officially calling it. So we'll call our next generation agent. So we have these agents that do that sort of that adverse media and what's known in our space as screening work, which again, it's repetitive. It follows set procedures. So we've done very well in that space, great clients around the world, able to scale in big volumes. Now, the second generation involves more reasoning models. We're saying, okay, we can look at the transaction activity for Paul for the last 12 months. The AI can identify outlying activity. It can highlight into a human investigator. It can even suggest that, we think this might be indicative of this particular type of crime. That's where we are now. So I would say there's more reasoning. Our AI agents, we do make decisions, but we really just suggest options to the human user. Like, we think it might be this. We suggest you do this. We don't think yet at this point, because these issues are so sensitive, that we would say, yes, David Caruso has engaged in suspicious activity. We've created this report and we're going to send it right to the US government without any human looking at it. That's maybe one day in the future, but the future is this second generation, more reasoning, more narrative creation, and ability to communicate with the agent like we do with a ChatGPT, for example. Ask it questions, get answers.
Thanks again, David, for chatting with us today. To close out the podcast, we have our now infamous FinTech jails. This is where we ask for an industry term, buzzword, or trend that you've seen or heard enough of. Or, of course, you can advocate to free one of the previously incarcerated terms. So what would your selection be for this week?
Mine was orchestration layer. And I focus on that. And this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is why a lot of financial crime professionals or buyers have skepticism. One of the reasons is that the folks who operate and run financial crime operations are not technologists. But yet you have all these software firms like ours and the software sales forces that go in and they do all the tech speak. So go back to one of your questions, what's one of the obstacles? One of the obstacles is you've got people on my side of the table, the software selling side, thinking they're selling to technologists. So they use terms like, oh, well, you can just get in there and do we have full orchestration layer. And I'm sitting there thinking the person on the other side of the table has no idea what that means. Because I remember when I first started hearing it, and I just thought, like, what are they talking? Now I understand what it means now, but to me, it's illustrative of one of the obstacles to the adoption of AI when software firms are selling to buyers who are not technologists. You can't go in and talk as though you're selling to software people, because the people on the other side of the table rarely will ever say, I'm sorry, I have no idea what orchestration layer means. Could you please speak normal English? Instead, they just nod. Okay, orchestration layer. And the salesman thinks, wow, I really nailed that meeting. That was great. No, you didn't. You were speaking a completely different language. So that's one of the terms in the jailhouse that just jumped out at me as a good example of that mismatch and communication that's common.
Yeah, sure. I guess if we were to throw orchestration layer in the jail, then how would you describe that to somebody who might not know what it is?
I would use terms such as, and you might visualize it on a screen. You'd say, instead of writing computer code, you can actually use a mouse and you can drag this function. If this function is look up transactions, you drag it and you put it in the workflow. And at the end, I say, oh, I understand that. Why couldn't we just use words like that?
Yeah.
We all have to come up with new words and language. And yeah, it's just one of the things we do as people.
Sure.
And then that's fine as long as the people you're speaking with understand that language. Right? If you're in the UK, I'm in the US. If I started describing baseball to you and started just using all these baseball terms and just assumed you knew them,
yeah,
You might not know any of them, but you'd sit there and nod. And I'd think, well, he really loves baseball. He understands more that.
Excellent. Yeah, I have been watching a bit of baseball recently, so I might be able to get away with a bit of passing knowledge there. But yeah, like you say, that's a much more effective definition that you've given there. So I'm more than happy to add orchestration layer to the gel this week. And we'll see later down the line if anybody wants to come on the show and break it back out again. But for now, David, thank you so much again for joining us for the podcast today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for this week. Thanks, of course, to David for joining me. As for FinTech Futures, you can find us online at fintechfutures.com, and be sure to follow us on LinkedIn to keep up with the latest fintech news. If you like this podcast and our other episodes, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcasting service to get notified about future episodes. Thanks as well to Arama for editing this podcast. You can check them out at arama.tv. And as always, thank you very much for your support. We'll see you soon for another episode of What the FinTech, but until then, goodbye.